Chapter 12. Our First Fallen Soldier. Before dawn, Thursday the 31st of August, 1939. Tilly threw back her blanket and grabbed Bonnie, who was yelping and whining. Weird, ghostly sounds were coming from all about the hut. The boys were awake now. Miles said in a loud whisper, "We'd better see what's out there, hadn't we?" But no one moved, and then something hit the side of the hut with a great crash, and dust and cobwebs fell from the ceiling. Hannah and Bono started barking and whining, and Rosie screamed and leapt to her feet, running forwards. "Come back!" shrieked Tilly, almost choking on the dust. Rosie hesitated at the door, and for a moment there was silence. Then a high-pitched, contorted voice said, "We're coming to get you." "It's that idiot Connor," yelled Sidney, and he ran to the door, wrenching it open, and yelled, "Come over here, you mongrels!" Inside the hut was bedlam. Pirate was squawking and patrolling up and down his perch frantically. The little pets were squeaking in their straw. Hannah and Bonnie were whining and barking, and Tilly suddenly thought, what if they break in and set Freddie free? Then we'll all be in so much trouble, letting a poisonous snake out. Releasing Bonnie from her lead, she marched out of the den, drew herself up into full height and cried out, "Stop it right now, you lot, or Bonnie will get you." Bonnie had started to growl, and she sounded quite menacing. It was only just beginning to get light, and the trees were casting deep pools of dark black all around the clearing. Squinting in the gloom, Tilly could just make out Connor and Boxer and Billy. They were clutching themselves with laughter. "Ain't you got no sense of humour?" sneered Connor as he parted Boxer's head, murmuring, "Good boy, good dog." "Oh, for goodness sake," said Rosie in her Megan voice. She had tucked her hair behind her ears and was smoothing down her skirt in an effort to look presentable. "Why don't you just leave us alone, unless that's what you really want is to play with us and all our pets?" "You must be joking," said Connor. It was getting lighter now, and Tilly could see his dark hair flopping in his eyes and the line of his mouth as he threw them a mocking grin. "Can't help it if you don't know how to keep your pets safe in the war." "Are you that stupid?" called out Sidney, and even Tilly was surprised. Connor gave him a wary look and pulled Boxer closer. He really does care about his dog, she thought. If only he wasn't such a bully, he would be quite useful. There was something about Connor which she had not noticed before, as though he wasn't as tough as he wanted everyone to think. But there was no time to worry about that now. He was putting the whole zoo at risk by behaving so stupidly. "Oi, how long do you think your dog's going to live, Connor?" Sidney went on. "Don't know what you mean. Ain't you seen the queues outside the vets? They're killing hundreds of pets. Me and my brother saw the bonfires down by the canal last night." "What bonfires?" said Rosie. "To burn the bodies," muttered Neville. "They threw some of them in the canal in sacks, weighting them down to make them sink. But they're too many. They've got dogs, cats, parrots, all sorts, burning away like mad." Rosie gasped. "That's what they're going to happen to Boxer, isn't it?" she said to Sidney, as he spat on the ground. "Don't listen to those dumbos," said Bill. But Connor looked as though all the fight had gone out of him as he fondled Boxer's ear. "Come on," he growled, as Bill and pulling on Boxer's chain, he strode away. "Good riddance to the bad rubbish," muttered Tilly, but she wasn't sure if she really meant it. Miles gave a laugh and said, "We just won our first battle, eh, Cumbras?" Sidney leapt in the air, whooping, and took off the ground clearing, arms out like a fighter playing a game. It must be properly morning, Tilly decided. The sun was climbing above the trees and the woods were light and airy in the early morning air. She called Bonnie and they went down to the stream, Bonnie for a drink and Tilly to rinse her face. As they walked back to the hut, Tilly called out, "Any food left? I'm starving." She could see Miles and Neville leaning in the doorway, and Sidney was sitting cross-legged on the grass, his head in his hands. "Did you check on the pets?" he asked Neville. He didn't reply, but nodded into the hut. Then Tilly heard sobbing, and going inside she saw Rosie huddled on the ground, a limp fur bundle in her arms and tears pouring down her face. "Rosie, what is it?" said Tilly. A blade of fear sliced through her. "Tinker Bell's died," sobbed Rosie. "Let me see. How did you know? Maybe she'd just sound asleep." Tilly put her hand out, but Rosie pulled away. Neville said in a quiet voice, "Ain't no use, Tills. Me and Sidney see dead rats all the time in the yard. She's properly gone." Tilly dropped down on the floor of the hut and patted Rosie's arm. "She must have gone when I was sleeping," said Rosie through her tears. I didn't know she was so ill. I abandoned her." "No, you didn't," cut in Tilly, horrified. For a moment she couldn't say anything else. Her best friend had just lost her darling pet, and the last link back to her parents. and the happy life she had before they passed away. This was a complete disaster. She cast about for something to say. There was nothing anyone could have done, Rosie, is there? I mean, look, you came here to sleep with her last night. That's not abandoning her, is it? Dear little Tinkerbell knew. She knew, well, how much you absolutely loved her. But you can't be sure. I am. I'm completely and utterly I am. They fell silent and Rosie started to smooth the matted fur from around Tinkerbell's mouth, which was tightly closed. Tilly reached out and gently stroked the cat's paw, but she could feel how stiff it was, and after a few seconds she let her hand drop back in her lap. All around the hut she could hear the sounds of pets waking up and foraging around in their crates for bits of food. One of the rabbits was thumping against the wooden wall, making a hollow echoing sound. Bonnie and Hannah were both lying on their bellies, noses on their paws, looking as miserable as Tilly felt, but that was probably because they were hungry. All the pets needed food and water, and the boys were just standing around with their hands in their pockets, and the clock was ticking. If we don't go back soon, thought Tilly, then the grown-ups will know we told them a pack of lies about camping in each other's gardens, and they might stop us going out for other days. What will happen to other pets? I've got to do something. And the perfect plan came to her. A funeral, she said, and Rosie paused in her sobbing. We'll bury Tinkerbell here by the hut so that she will always be part of our emergency zoo. We have to put her name, said Rosie in a tiny voice. I don't want her forgotten, not ever. Like I never forget Mummy and Daddy. Of course, said Tilly. We'll bury her with full military honours, said Neville. That's right, put in Mars in a quiet voice. Tinkerbell is our first fallen soldier, and we've got to do it properly. And we have to do it before our parents expect us home for breakfast, muttered Tilly. It's already 8 o'clock, and if we left it much longer, the grown-ups would catch them out. Sidney came into the hut and started to root around in the corner. Here, he said, brandishing an old tin box. Put her in that. Keep her safe from the foxes. Before Rosie could sob out about Tinkerbell being eaten by a fox, Tilly said in a bright voice, Oh, that's lovely, Sidney. Well done. And it's a good, strong lid. You can fill it with moss and stuff, Rose. And her favourite pink flannel, said Rosie, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Come on, boys, said Mars, brandishing his knife. Let's go and find some good, safe spot and start digging. The boys disappeared and Tilly cradled Tinkerbell while Rosie prepared her final resting place. She murmured to Tinkerbell while she worked. So you see, my darling little cat, you'll be perfectly safe in here and very cosy, and I'll come every day and put flowers on your grave like me and Megan and Donald do for Mummy and Daddy after Sunday after church. Tears welled up in Tilly's eyes, and she fought to keep them back. I mustn't cry in front of Rosie, she told herself, but it was so hard not to sob out loud. Rosie took Tinkerbell and laid her tenderly into the box. Sidney came back and said, We've got a smashing place for her. Come and see. They all went round to a sunny spot at the back of the hut. Miles and Neville were scrabbling in a hole almost 2 feet deep and wide to take the box. Gotta make it deep, huffed Neville. Keep her safe. Tilly helped Rosie make a small cross with some string and 2 nice straight branches which Miles cut from a tree. I'll make a sign with her name when I get home, said Rosie in a low voice. I can use the oil paints Donald gave me for my birthday. The rain won't wash them away. Good idea, said Tilly. They all stood around the grave while Rosie lowered the box inside. The boys pushed the earth back and trod it down. Rosie pushed the cross into the ground at one end. The children stood still for a bit, and then Ma said, I could fire an arrow, sort of like a 6-gun salute. Tilly gave him a nod, and he pointed his bow skywards and released the arrow. It flew in an arc over the grave and landed in the ground a few yards away. Good one, said Tilly. I know a poem Miss Cotton taught us, said Sidney. Really? Said Tilly, astonished. Sid reads books all the time, muttered Neville. They lend 'em to him special like in school. Miss Cotton says 'cause he's clever enough to go to grammar school, only we ain't got the money for the uniform. Sidney shoved his hands in his torn pockets and ducked his head. Go on then, said Tilly. She told us to learn a bit of this poem about the Great War. They said it would help remember the fallen, said Sidney. It's by Lawrence Bin somebody. I know 2 verses. He put his hands straight by his side, stiff as a soldier, and recited the verse without tripping up once off and finishing. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. There was a silence and Tilly found herself wondering why she hadn't spotted before that Sidney was actually very clever. Then Rosie wiped her eyes and said, That's beautiful, Sidney. Thank you ever so much. Shall we say the Lord's Prayer? Everyone nodded and Tilly closed her eyes and put her hands together as they all murmured the familiar lines finishing, For ever and ever. Amen. They opened their eyes and stood in silence for a few minutes. Eventually, Miles said, "We will remember Tinkerbell as our first fallen soldier of the emergency zoo." Rosie wiped a few tears away and Tilly gave her a hug, and tears welled up again in her eyes too. Everyone bundled together their blankets and other things and set off back home. Tilly couldn't help thinking how much they'd been through since they had kissed her mother goodnight that evening before. "We've built a fire and cooked our own food, slept out all night without the grown-ups, saved the pets from the enemy, but we've also buried our first pet. And we must still haven't made a decision about who will look after them after the zoo when we and we still haven't made a decision about who will look after the zoo when we're evacuated. What on earth are we going to do?" she wondered, as she waved goodbye to her friend and cycled slowly home. Workmen were painting thick white lines around the postbox, the lampposts, and the trees in her street, but her mind was too full of worries to wonder why.